TESOL Pop, special episode, our 100th episode. Hi everybody, welcome to TESOL Pop, the mini podcast for busy teachers. My name is Laura and joining me is fellow co-founder Eve Conway to talk about generative AI and the trends that we're seeing in education. Welcome back, Eve. It's been a while.
Hi Laura, yeah, it's been a really long while. I'm really excited to be back for the 100th episode of TESOL Pop. Congratulations.
So I'm really glad we've got this time and thanks for coming on the show to talk about this. In terms of generative AI, like what we're talking about today, just to kind of ground us in terms of what that looks like. What is generative AI and how is it kind of influencing what we do as educators? I think everybody knows about ChatGPT, or maybe they don't actually. Maybe we shouldn't assume.
Well, I think generative, if you break down the word, it's AI that generates things, but that can be like many things really. So the typical one we think of, the one that you just mentioned, was ChatGPT, where you enter a prompt and it writes a text. So you can say, give me 5 recipes. This is what I use it for, 5 low carb recipes using these ingredients, and it will generate the recipes for you. But then there are so many uses of generative AI. It's not just limited to texts. So for example, artwork can be generated. You can brief an AI to create you an image, and even things like music, and I think scripts too. There was I think a lot of controversy during LA writers' strike about the use of AI in writing. I think a lot of actors and script writers were worried that some of the work would be taken over by AIs to write those and produce those scripts.
I know you still work with educators. You work from an assessment perspective now, an examining perspective in creating exams and stuff. So I think between the two of us, we bring quite unique perspectives in what we're seeing for the classroom, for teachers and learners when it comes to generative AI. What are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big issue in education at the moment. I think all teachers have experienced students handing in work which isn't their own work. Plagiarism's always been a big issue. And I think you can speak to any teacher about plagiarism and they will have had that experience of the student submitting that work that isn't theirs. But I think with AI now, it's just made it so easy for students to be able to do that. They can just type in a prompt and they can get a text written for them. Yeah, I was talking to one of my friends who's still teaching a month or so ago, and he was saying that his students did it all the time sometimes, but at the moment anyway, I'm not sure whether AI is good enough to produce an essay that looks like it could have been written by a B1 student or a B2 level student, because he said that he can always tell when his students have used AI to write an essay because they use extremely complicated vocabulary. You know, like this is a spellbinding classic which endures the test of time when writing about a book. He said, I know that my B2 level student hasn't written that themselves, that it's come from AI.
Do you think that's because, though, that the students don't know how to prompt the AI quite yet and they're still learning how to use it themselves? Because you could instruct the AI to write, and I'm not trying to suggest on this podcast how to cheat in essays and stuff, but you could prompt it to say, could you use this type of vocabulary that would be appropriate for the CFR level of a B2 student within this context? With a bit more prompting, it could get better, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's learning all the time, isn't it? And it's developing all the time and it's getting better all the time. So I would not be surprised if further down the line, that's a possibility. I mean, it's always been that way, hasn't it? That there's a development, whatever the development is, and then people find ways with cheating to get around that development or around that rule. Like when I was researching for today, I was looking at Turnitin, which is a popular AI detector, and I just typed it into YouTube to see what videos there were. And one of the first things that came up on YouTube was how to kind of get around plagiarism detectors. So there are people out there making videos for students to learn how to circumnavigate plagiarism detector software already.
But this isn't something new, though, is it? Right? This has always existed in the education industry. I remember when Wikipedia was quite new. and that's me showing my age in terms of how long I've been teaching, but how that kind of had an influence on what students were producing and how they used that. And I think, to play the devil's advocate, some students didn't know how to use it as a resource, and learning what the line is in terms of like using it as research or to bounce ideas versus just kind of plagiarizing. And learning that was definitely a grey area that we had to navigate. Thinking about like my early days teaching in a college, so that's one aspect, isn't it? But I think you've always had like cheating as an issue in education. We beforehand, it used to be in the form of like people could pay for essays. Like that was a whole industry, it probably still is, where people can actually buy somebody's time to write for them. Of course, people could just copy from text and stuff like that. That was also something, but a bit easier to detect. But I think with the former example of actually buying somebody's time, like a writer's time to write for you for essays and stuff like that, it was less accessible because it was very expensive. So what I feel with ChatGPT and Gemini and these like text generating AI apps is that it's made it more accessible. So it's now a bigger problem than what it was before, because it's almost like democratizing access to having a private writer for you, you know?
Yeah, we like to democratize things in education, don't we? And it feels like we've democratized cheating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think you're right. The cheating has always definitely been there. Like you mentioned Wikipedia. I remember students using Google Translate all the time to just translate things from L1 straight into L2, which obviously would give you an awful piece of text, but they still did it anyway. The technology has got smarter in some ways. So I think like if I think back to my students using Google Translate, it was so obvious that this text was not written by a human because or had been translated rather by AI because of the amount of mistakes in there, inappropriate vocabulary. And I think with the AI written text, I think you can still tell that it wasn't written by the student, but it's often because it's the language is so sophisticated and perhaps beyond their level. I think the computers have gotten much smarter in their use of language, and I think just more sophisticated in their use of language. If you compare those texts that were churned out by Google Translate and kind of had grammatical errors all over the place, you don't find that same level of grammatical inaccuracy in a ChatGPT text. So I think that's the scary thing, is that they are getting better. And if they're getting better, then perhaps in the future, a few steps down the line, like you said, they'll be able to write a text that actually can imitate a student's writing quite accurately.
So I wonder what the way forward is, because there's obviously several use cases here, like needs here, that come to mind. One is like learner training and setting expectations for learners, like on how to use these tools, because they're wonderful tools, right, when used well, but it can go the wrong way if they don't know what the guidelines are. There's also guidelines that are needed to be set by schools and training for teachers so they feel confident in conveying that to the students and enacting guidelines if they need to. And there's also kind of the assessment itself, right? How do we assess students? I think that's where it's probably the most problematic that, obviously we're talking about in this conversation today, is how can we assess students in a way that's fair, but also kind of proofs the assessment against easily being written by somebody else, whether that's an AI somebody else or you're paying for somebody else to write it, because that has always been an issue.
It has, yeah. There are a lot of big questions there. I think in terms of like classroom usage and teaching, I think teachers should talk to their students about AI, and they should make it clear like what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. My teacher friend that I mentioned before did a lesson on AI with his students, and he compared two texts in the class, like an AI written one and a student written one, and they looked for clues to show that the text was written by AI, and the objective of the lesson was for them to realize just how stupid it was to plagiarize in that way, really, because they were going to get found out. So I think that's an important discussion to have in the classroom. I also think that teachers could possibly explore using AI as prompts. So I did this one day with an essay that I was writing. I just wrote in a question and just looked at what came out. And I used it as a springboard to kind of think about my own ideas, because I didn't actually like what the AI spat out. I disagreed with most of the points that were on there, but it got me thinking about what my own ideas were. And then from that, I made a plan of my own ideas. And from that, I was able to construct an essay. So I think that sort of usage could be useful.
Learner training, basically showing them how to use it. I think that's going to be an integrated part of just teaching, setting up assessments, the resources that you bring into the classroom, right? I think this is brilliant. Like, so guidelines, involving the students in the guidelines, making it not just about guidelines and what your expectations are, but also supporting that critical thinking to help them also develop their digital literacy, AI literacy, if that could be a thing. And then also integrating it in as a tool, showing best practices on how to use it. So that's a really positive way of approaching it. There was one other thing, wasn't it, that I was going to ask about, and that's the assessments itself. Because are we really going to go back to just getting students to sit in a room with proctoring in place and somebody there to kind of do timed essays? Is that what we're going to end up going back to? Because that doesn't feel so accessible or that particularly reliable. I remember some of the exams I sat where I just felt awfully ill and I had to sit there and still do it. And I know it wasn't the best that I could do. So yeah, it feels like that old model doesn't, it doesn't have all the solutions either.
Yeah, it's a really tough one because I know that this is something that the Department for Education are thinking about a lot, is this use of AI and how to make sure that students' work is their own work. I know that a lot of general qualifications now, so A-levels, GCSEs, are now 100% externally assessed.
What does that mean?
Externally assessed means that students will complete an exam and that exam will be marked by an examiner from the exam board, as opposed to doing what we call NEA, non-exam assessment. That's more your traditional coursework options. So things like maybe students in the past, when we were at school, we used to do essays for English as coursework, and our teacher would then mark them. And they'd just be moderated by the exam board. A lot of subjects now for GCSE and A-level, the Department for Education has set out that they have to be 100% externally assessed.
And does that mean also within time conditions as well for those externally assessed pieces? Yeah, that's really problematic, isn't it? Because I think if we think about students that need that additional support, time, flexibility for whatever their additional need may be, it then kind of puts them at a disadvantage, doesn't it, in terms of their performance? Because maybe they need extra time, maybe they need support because of like dyslexia or something like that, or for health reasons, or any other sort of reasons that are specific to that learner's needs. We can't all perform that well under time conditions on a specific day.
No, absolutely. And for certain subjects too, it just makes more sense to have coursework-based options. So, luckily, I work on a lot of vocational qualifications, and a lot of the vocational assessments that are out there at the moment still have a lot of NEA, non-exam assessment, because it's recognised that practical work is such an important part of those qualifications. But yeah, I think if we move to a landscape where everything is 100% externally assessed, I think, like you say, there will be issues for things like accessibility and just assessment validity.
It's difficult to know where it's going to go, isn't it? But I think there definitely needs to be structures in place, guidelines on how AI is used, and maybe creative solutions and troubleshooting on what assessment is going to look like for the future that kind of also doesn't exclude people.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree.
So overall, like to close today's episode, how are you feeling about the future in AI? Are you feeling quite optimistic or? Yeah.
I feel excited about it. I don't know if that's maybe a false sense of excitement. I don't know whether I should be excited by it. I just think that whenever there's something new, there's also new opportunity. So it might be good to embrace some of those opportunities that are there in AI, but at the same time, be mindful of the risks that come with it.
Yeah, it's kind of like having that balanced approach, isn't it? I couldn't agree more. Eve, it's been lovely to talk about this with you. Thanks so much for coming back on the show to chat about generative AI and assessment.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to be here.
So, folks, what are your thoughts on this topic? Are you doing things in your school to embrace AI, or are you thinking of other things that you can do to assess your students? Share your ideas and thoughts on the website by going to tesolpop.com. You can find this particular episode and add your comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Finally, you can support the work we do by leaving a rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast, by sharing today's episode with your teaching community, or by even buying us a coffee by going to ko-fi.com/TESOL.